We get to go and visit with our good friends over at the Texan.news and senior editor of the Texan, McKenzie Taylor, joining us here on the Chad Hasty Show. McKenzie, good afternoon. How are you today?
I'm well, Chad. Congrats on the balmy weather.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, it does feel good out here. It's just we got a nice little dust storm going. That's how it goes in West Texas sometimes. Hey, there's obviously a lot going on, and obviously with the mask order and everything else. But there's actual legislation that is at least being debated and playing out on social media and in different corners of Austin. Talk to us a little bit about a great piece that I think was published yesterday over the Texan about House Bill 3.
Absolutely. So for those who don't know, which if you're living your day-to-day life as a Texan, you probably don't, and that's why we're here. But House Bill 3 is the Texas Pandemic Response Act, filed by Lubbock's own Representative Dustin Burrows. And certainly there has been healthy debate already about this piece of legislation, whether or not this would actually do what it's intended to do. Republicans are largely the ones coming to both to bat for the legislation and criticizing this piece of legislation. Basically what this bill does is it largely codifies Governor Abbott's response to the pandemic. During this, COVID-19, during 2020, Governor Abbott drew a lot of the executive power that he's utilized in that time period from the Texas Disaster Act. And essentially this bill would, slide in one more chapter right after Chapter 418 of the Texas Government Code and say, okay, here's how Governor Abbott responded to the COVID-19 pandemic, and here's how it will be codified going forward. Republicans are a little divided on this topic, and I think it's safe to say that Governor Abbott has been both praised and criticized for his response to the pandemic. A lot of conservatives are disappointed that certain executive authorities have been exercised, and other Republicans think he tread the line well. Democrats say, hey, well, we wanted to have a voice in how things were operated, and we weren't able to as legislators. We should have had a special session. So there's all sorts of different, opinions and debates being, flown around, and this bill highlights all of those. So some of the criticisms say that, hey, this bill doesn't actually curb the governor's executive authority. It just codifies what's already happened. The policy chair of the Republican Party of Texas has pulled no punches. Joe Glover has pulled no punches in saying that it would extend executive powers and would give federal government more power in our state by mandating that businesses comply with CDC recommendations, was what she wrote. If businesses refuse to comply, it would lose liability protections. There's concerns there from the Republican Party of Texas. Other folks say that under this current draft, this would basically allow a governor in the future who is not of, the Republican Party, for those Republicans supporting it, to exercise authority to enact legislation or, offer executive orders, say that there's a climate crisis, right, or a gun control problem. Folks on the left, utilizing these powers that Republicans are putting forward, that's a big concern for folks too. And I think it's safe to say going forward, we've seen a lot of drama between the House and the Senate in previous legislative sessions. And I think it's safe to say this is the first big, policy issue that we're seeing a lot of division publicly between the House and the Senate. The Senate came forward with their own proposal today. We're still waiting on some details for it, but it differs drastically from the House's. And I think we'll continue to see this debate ramp up over the session.
I think so. And I think that you're going to see, and I know you have some comments in the story from Chairman Burrows, and one of the comments in there, and it is interesting, the liability protections. He seems to think that that's in there, and it does read that way, but it also can be interpreted in different parts where businesses could be held liable. I know they want to clean up that language. He has said so on this show, and some other Republican lawmakers have said that part of the language needs to be cleared up. It looks like this is not only a House versus Senate debate. This is going to be Republicans in the House going to battle over this, because I think people do want to see the governor's powers curbed at least a little bit more than what we saw in this in this pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, just like you said, that will be a big part of the discussion going forward. one of the pieces of legislation in the Senate that has been filed in the Senate today is a Senate joint resolution, so basically a constitutional amendment, and that would require there'd be some triggers in there for the legislature to force the governor to call a special session, right? So a little bit of a different approach. And certainly that has been a big criticism from, legislators of both sides of the aisle saying, hey, this pandemic was affecting our constituents and we wanted to have a say in what the response was. The governor did have a lot of authority, again, because of the Disaster Act, and legislators, of different stripes see that as a problem. Chairman Burrows is certainly trying to tread the line here. He certainly has, he's rebutted a lot of these claims that have been put up by other lawmakers. And I think, the tone that he's taken lately has been very, hey, bring your concerns. We want to have a full and robust debate is what he said often. And so it'll be interesting to see as this bill makes its way through the process, what that debate ends up looking like, how much discussion, how much amending is able to be on the table for other lawmakers to have a say in what the final product is, and, how that final, bartering between the House and the Senate what will result as a result of that.
And listen, I think this should be. I mean, this was obviously an issue that hurt a lot of people. Business owners. This was an issue that Republicans weren't happy with, Democrats weren't happy with. I don't know of anyone who was just perfectly happy with the response here, which means we need to have a big, healthy debate over what this looks like moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to your point, we knew prior to session, you and I talked about this weeks ago, that this would be one of the primary tenets of this, legislative session. This would be one of the big items that would be tackled along with redistricting the budget. I think this is number 3. So this is expected. We will certainly continue to see healthy debate on this. And just like you said, no one really envies the governor's position, but I think there are genuine concerns from folks of both political stripes of, okay, well, what can be done better next time? Yeah.
And I almost think that you're going to have some kind of trigger in there, whatever the final bill looks like. I mean, it would surprise me if we didn't have some type of trigger that called back the legislative session, because the lawmakers that I at least hear from, it seems like just about everybody wants that trigger in there. They just can't agree on how many days it needs to be.
Yeah, certainly. 30, 60, what are we dealing with here? How long should a disaster declaration exist prior to some sort of, action being taken or other voices being part of the process?
Yeah. Let's see. What about, lawmakers are still filing legislation. Anything new that has caught your eye lately in the last few days as we've been talking about masks and everything else?
Yeah, certainly. There has been all sorts of stuff. I think one of the pieces on our website, the Texan.news right now, that has had a lot of attention from folks is actually a bill from Representative Matt Schaefer out in Tyler, who essentially filed a piece of legislation that would have prevented any mask mandates from being enacted in the first place, both on the state and the local level. Obviously a lot of folks from the grassroots level were very excited about that kind of bill in terms of, conservatism. There was a lot of enthusiasm for that bill. Certainly something that we'll be continuing to watch here at the Texan, and folks care deeply about, that issue, particularly in light of the governor's announcement this week, where, a pending rescinding of the mask mandate here in Texas. There was also a lawmaker today, Brian Slayton, again from out in East Texas, introduced a bill to finish Trump's border wall using state funds. That was just announced a couple of hours ago. And that, for obvious reasons, garnered a lot of attention from folks. A lot of people are concerned about the border crisis on both sides of the aisle. There's a lot coming down the pipe there. So that's a piece that we have on our website, just published a little while ago. There's all sorts of things. There's also, bills to protect monuments, historical monuments. The Cenotaph has made headlines multiple times this week. Some new plans. The Cenotaph in San Antonio, part of the Alamo plans revisioning folks were concerned it would be moved. It no longer will. Folks have changed their tune, both in the city and George P. Bush, the commissioner for the General Land Office. So, that plan will be moving forward without the cenotaph moving, which is, big news for Texans, big news for San Antonians. So all sorts of different things, but those are probably the top three on our website right now.
Don't you think they just need to, find and part of this whole deal with the Alamo and the cenotaph, there's just so much that's unknown. It's almost like it's a little secret plan that they don't want to give out to too many people yet about what's going on. And I mean, I would think that, listen, there are a whole lot of Texans who care what happens with the Alamo and what that area is going to look like. I would think that, the commissioner, George P. Bush, would want to get that information out there as much as possible.
Well, I think that was a big part of, he was primaried and in the Republican primary, and there was certainly some discontent among grassroots folks in terms of, okay, well, this is a big issue of ours. We don't feel like you're being forthright in terms of what you're actually planning. And, we care about our history and our legacy as Texans. And so, in different years, he's faced political pressure because of that. And no, you're right. There's, this week in a Senate hearing, a lot of folks were relieved to hear the commissioner say that the cenotaph ain't moving. That's his direct quote. The cenotaph ain't moving. And obviously folks were very excited about that. And there was relief for a lot of Texans in hearing him say those words. And then I think after a deep breath, they go, okay, well, what's next? Right? Okay, well, what does this mean now? Okay, that's not moving. Our concerns are, in some way pacified now, but what does it mean for going forward? It sounds like the plan is largely intact. He said the master plan stays the exact same except for the cenotaph. That were his exact words in the hearing. So, but again, what does that exact plan look like? We know a little bit about it. We know that there are some concerns about any sort of, emphasis placed on history that folks have concerns about, but we don't know a lot of the specifics, and I think there does seem to be a veil there.
Yeah, absolutely. McKenzie, tell folks what else they can find over at the Texan.news.
Absolutely. Well, another piece I really think is important to a lot of Texans. One of our reporters, Daniel Friend, just did some open records requests, looked at some data, found out that Texas license to carry holders account for a minute fraction of convictions per a DPS report. We're talking less than 1%. Very interesting statistics there. You can find at the Texan.news. We have all sorts of legislative proposals. We're following ERCOT, PUC news. We're following special elections, all sorts of legislative proposals. So make sure to go check us out at the Texan.news.
All right. McKenzie Taylor, senior editor of the Texan. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thanks, Chad. Have a good one.
You too. That's McKenzie Taylor, senior editor over at the Texan. Go and check out what they have. They've got some really great stories out there. Really good write-up on HB-3, a couple write-ups on HB-3 that you can check out there at the Texan.news.